My dear brothers and sisters, we gather here today not in the quiet comfort of peace, but in the trembling shadow of loss. We are met in a solemn hour, hearts broken, spirits weary, yet our souls are still crying out for justice that has long been denied. For today, we offer a eulogy not only to honor the lives of the martyred children, but to remind this world of its unfinished work. These children, snatched too soon by the bitter winds of hatred and violence, are not forgotten. No, they are the bright morning stars who will rise again in our conscience. They are the silent prophets whose blood speaks louder than any sermon, whose absence demands the presence of love, of truth, of righteousness. We come not to bury them in silence, but to raise their memory as a banner of hope. For every child who has fallen to the cruelty of war, to the evil of neglect, to the plague of indifference, we declare today that their sacrifice shall not be in vain. The grave cannot hold the cry for justice, the night cannot silence the song of freedom, and the darkness cannot quench the light of a child's dream. Let us mourn, but let us not despair. Let us weep, but not surrender. For from their pain must rise our purpose. From their ashes must rise a new dawn where children can live and grow and dream without fear. The innocence of a child is the purest light that ever shines in this darkened world. It is untainted by hatred, untouched by violence, and unshaped by the corruptions of prejudice. And yet, it was that very innocence that was met with brutality. That innocence that was shattered, not by accident, not by fate, but by the deliberate silence of those who looked the other way while evil marched boldly forward. When we speak of the martyred children, we are not just remembering faces. We are confronting the soul of a nation, trembling under the weight of what it allowed to happen. The laughter that once filled their homes, the dreams that danced behind their eyes, were silenced before they had a chance to bloom. And in that silence, the conscience of the nation stirred. Uneasy, ashamed, awakened. The death of a child should never be acceptable. It should never become routine. Yet in our world, where sirens wail more than lullabies and bullets are heard more than bedtime stories, we have somehow normalized the unthinkable. We have allowed schoolyards to become graveyards and neighborhoods to become war zones. We have grown so used to seeing innocent blood spilled that we scroll past it like a passing storm. But these children, these tiny souls with hearts full of wonder, deserve more than our mourning. They deserve a memory that moves us. They deserve a legacy that changes us. Their innocence, once overlooked, now stands as the most powerful mirror in which we must see ourselves. Because when a child is martyred, it is not just a family that loses a son or daughter. It is a society that loses its reflection. The tears of grieving mothers, the trembling hands of fathers clinging to empty shoes, the silence of siblings left behind, these are not private tragedies. These are public indictments. These are questions shouted into the heavens, demanding not just answers, but action. How can we call ourselves civilized while our children perish under the weight of our apathy? It was not just their lives that were taken, it was their potential, the books they would have written, the discoveries they would have made, the families they would have raised, the joy they would have spread, all snatched away, as if their existence was a footnote in someone else's violent agenda. And yet, even in their passing, they have spoken louder than any living voice. They have become symbols, not of death, but of the life we failed to protect. Their loss has pierced the national conscience more deeply than any speech ever could. We cannot erase their suffering, but we can decide how it shapes us. Their innocence is not just a memory, it is a summons. A divine call to stand taller, to speak louder, to act faster. It demands that we build a world where a child's right to dream is never again interrupted by gunfire, where no parent must pick out a coffin instead of a birthday cake, where innocence is no longer seen as expendable. Their short lives call upon us to create a long, lasting change. Their unspoken prayers ask us to become the answer. Their lost tomorrows beg us to seize today. Their silence speaks louder than 1,000 cries for justice. Not because they chose silence, but because their voices were stolen before they could fully form words of protest, dreams of tomorrow, or songs of laughter. The stillness left in their absence is deafening. It echoes through empty classrooms, quiet bedrooms, and dinner tables with untouched plates. That silence, that piercing, unbearable silence, is not quiet. It roars with meaning. It accuses the systems that failed them, the leaders who turned away, the communities that became numb to the headlines, and the apathy that allowed such tragedy to happen again and again. They are not here to tell us what happened. They cannot take the stand in a courtroom or march through the streets holding signs of protest. But in their absence, they speak a different kind of truth. It's a truth that rattles our bones and sears our conscience. It asks us what kind of world lets children die before they ever learn how to live. Their silence tells a story no volume of words could contain. It tells of hopes unfulfilled, futures cut short, and laughter replaced by lament. It is the kind of silence that should shake the walls of every institution built on the promise of protection and care. This is not just the silence of death. It is the silence of warning. It is the hush that falls before a storm of reckoning. It's the silence that invites us to pause, to listen not just with our ears but with our hearts. For in that silence lies a powerful question. Will we continue to allow their stories to be forgotten, or will we rise to become the voices they were never given the chance to become? Their silence demands that we listen more carefully than we ever have before, because within that silence is a language written not in letters, but in the echoes of injustice, and if we are courageous enough to hear it, it will change us. In their silence, we find a call to conscience, a demand that goes beyond slogans and speeches. It demands action, soul, deep, life-changing action. It reminds us that the absence of a cry does not mean the absence of pain. That just because a child no longer speaks does not mean they don't deserve to be heard. Their stillness is not peace, it is protest. It is not the end of their presence, it is the beginning of our responsibility. That silence must not lull us into forgetting. It must push us into remembering more vividly, more urgently. Their silence calls upon the artists to paint their dreams. It calls upon the poets to write their names. It calls upon the mothers to hold their children tighter and the fathers to fight harder for a safer world. It asks the teachers to teach with a fiercer hope, and the lawmakers to legislate with a deeper compassion. And it asks each of us, what will you do with the sound of their silence ringing in your ears? Will you pretend not to hear it? Or will you answer it with a life lived for truth, for justice, and for love more powerful than hate? From ashes of suffering shall rise the flame of change. Though the ground has been soaked with innocent blood, and our hearts scorched with grief too deep for words, there is something eternal that suffering cannot destroy. There is a power born not in comfort but in pain, not in safety but in sacrifice. When children are taken from this world too soon, when they become martyrs in a war they never chose, their suffering does not fade into silence. it ignites something sacred in those left behind. It stirs a fire that cannot be extinguished by fear, cannot be buried by bureaucracy, and will not be silenced by the passage of time. The ashes we hold are more than the remains of lives cut short. They are the seeds of transformation. Every tear shed over a lost child becomes part of a river that reshapes the landscape of our society. Every gasp of disbelief becomes a breath that fuels the winds of revolution. In every funeral march, there is a rhythm of resistance. In every moment of mourning, there is a flicker of momentum. For when a child suffers, when a child dies, the world is summoned to remember its most sacred duty, to protect the innocent, to defend the defenseless, to rise in the name of those who can no longer rise themselves. These ashes are not the end. They are the beginning of a better world, if we dare to let them be. They demand that we turn our mourning into mission, our pain into purpose, our sorrow into strength. We are not meant to sit among the ruins and whisper regrets. We are meant to rise, to rebuild, to relight the torches that injustice tried to snuff out. The suffering of the children must become the spark that awakens those who have been asleep too long in comfort and convenience. Their pain must become the blueprint for a future where no child fears the sound of sirens, no mother clutches her heart at a late-night phone call, no father buries his child instead of walking her to school. In the glow of that rising flame, we must see not just the outlines of what was lost, but the shape of what must now be created. A society built not on vengeance, but on vigilance, not on silence, but on speaking up, not on complacency, but on courage. That flame must illuminate the dark corners where hate still hides, where ignorance still whispers, where indifference still sleeps. It must reach into the halls of power and into the hearts of people, awakening a resolve that is louder than politics and deeper than policy. Let that flame be passed from hand to hand, from the teacher who refuses to let any child feel invisible, to the activist who refuses to grow weary, to the parent who chooses hope over despair each morning. Let it burn in communities that organize, in leaders who listen, in artists who create from pain. Let it burn not as a fire of destruction, but of renewal. For from these ashes we are called to rise, not because we are ready, but because we must. Because in the suffering of the smallest among us lies the most urgent call to be bigger, braver, and better than we have ever been before. The cost of hatred measured in tiny coffins is a price no just world should ever be willing to pay. There is a sacredness to childhood, a sacredness that should be guarded with all the might of our laws, the tenderness of our love, and the vigilance of our humanity. Yet time and time again, hatred has marched boldly through our neighborhoods, slipped into our schools, poisoned our airwaves, and lodged itself in the hearts of men and women who have forgotten how to see a child as sacred. And what is the result of such hatred? It is not a political victory, not a cultural triumph, but a procession of tiny coffins borne on shoulders too weary from grief to stand tall. Every time we allow hatred to fester, every time we choose prejudice over empathy, division over unity, or vengeance over peace, we place another child at risk. The true weight of that choice cannot be measured in votes or headlines. It is measured in those miniature caskets lined with soft fabric, built to carry dreams that never had a chance to unfold. These small wooden boxes are not symbols of closure. They are indictments of a society that has failed its most vulnerable. They are not just resting places. They are warnings carved in silence and grief. We tell ourselves that children are the future, yet what future are we giving them if we allow them to be targets of our hatred, our neglect, our indifference? What future remains when playrooms become memorials and laughter is replaced by eulogies written too soon? These coffins are too small for the lives they carry, too small for the light that once shone in those young eyes, too small to contain the boundless possibilities each child represented. And yet they carry the weight of our failures, our broken promises, our silence in the face of wrong. Hatred does not need to shout to be dangerous. Sometimes it hides behind policies that devalue life. Sometimes it dresses itself in polite language and respectable clothing. Sometimes it enters through back doors and back rooms while the world looks the other way. But no matter how it arrives, the cost is always the same. It is the child who never gets to ride a bicycle again, the child who never learns to read, the child who never gets to fall in love or start a family. The cost is always too high, always too cruel, always too final. We must begin to understand that hatred is not merely an emotion. It is a force with consequences that ripple through generations. A force that does not just burn cities or topple governments, but one that breaks hearts and steals futures one small life at a time, and the smallest among us pay the steepest price. They carry no prejudice, they hold no grudges, and yet they lie in the earth, silent victims of an anger they never chose, of a war they never started. Each tiny coffin is a question asked to the soul of our humanity. How much longer will we tolerate a world where love is buried and hate survives? How many more dreams must be lowered into the ground before we say enough is enough? How many more times must we witness the unimaginable before we refuse to let it be repeated? They died too young, but their legacy lives forever. Though their time on this earth was painfully brief, the light they carried has not been extinguished. It burns now in the hearts of those who remember, those who mourn, and those who rise in their name. These children, whose lives were taken by cruelty, carelessness, or the coldness of a broken system, did not live long enough to leave behind great works of art or speeches or inventions. But they left behind something greater. They left behind a call to action, a reminder of what we must never allow again, a legacy forged not in years but in meaning. Their legacy is found in the way their absence stirs a fire in our hearts, in the way their stories, though short, demand to be told, in every photograph of a smiling face now frozen in time, in every birthday uncelebrated, in every school desk left empty. Their legacy grows louder. They become symbols of the world we failed to give them, and the world we are now called to build. Their short lives have become long echoes that travel farther than they ever could have imagined, touching people they never met, inspiring movements they never got to see. We may not know their last thoughts, but we know their first dreams. We know they wanted to play, to learn, to laugh, to be held. We know they had favorite toys and songs they liked to sing. We know they had nicknames, habits, quirks, and hopes. And in all of that humanness, all of that beautiful simplicity, lies the greatest tragedy and the greatest truth, that they mattered, and because they mattered, their deaths matter. Because they lived, however briefly, their legacy endures. It lives in every parent who now looks into their child's eyes with a deeper sense of protection and purpose. It lives in every teacher who enters a classroom not just to instruct, but to nurture. It lives in every activist who holds up a sign, every neighbor who speaks up, every artist who dares to express their grief through color and word and sound. It lives in laws rewritten, in prayers spoken, in silence observed. It lives in our tears, but more importantly, it lives in our decisions. Their legacy is not just in our sorrow, it is in our strength, in the way we choose to respond, in the way we show up for one another, in the way we insist on remembering what the world tries to forget. And so even though their voices were silenced too soon, they speak still, not through words, but through the transformation they ignite in us. They push us to imagine a different world, a world where no child fears for their life, where no parent fears for their child, where innocence is no longer treated as expendable. We are not simply mourning what was lost, we are protecting what remains. We are not only grieving, we are building, brick by brick, policy by policy, choice by choice. Their legacy is a living thing, pulsing with possibility, and it is our sacred task to carry it forward, not just with our words, but with our lives. They may have died too young, but through us, they continue to shape the future they never got to see. Let the memory of the martyred move mountains of injustice. Let it be the force that shakes the very foundations of systems built on neglect and indifference. Let it rise like thunder across silent hills and echo through the streets where their names were once unknown. These children did not ask to become symbols, did not choose to bear the weight of our collective failures, yet their lives have become sacred reminders that justice delayed is not just justice denied, it is life denied. Their memory is not a whisper of what was lost, but a roar of what must now be found. Each name, each face, each unfinished story has become a torch passed into our hands. It lights the path forward, but it also sets fire to the roots of injustice. It burns through complacency, through the polite silence of those too afraid to speak, through the cold calculations of policy makers who forget the human cost behind their decisions. The memory of the martyred is not passive. It is a call to action etched into the conscience of every man, woman, and child who dares to dream of a world where innocence is not punished and vulnerability is not exploited. Their memory is a monument not built of stone, but of purpose. It is engraved not in marble, but in every act of courage, in every moment when someone chooses to stand up rather than sit back. It breathes life into the weary, gives voice to the unheard, and power to the powerless. It reminds us that we are not too small to matter, not too broken to make change, not too late to begin again. These children, though silenced, now speak more powerfully than ever before, not through words, but through the lives they compel us to live. They push us to tear down what harms and build what heals, to not only speak truth to power, but to live truth in the face of pain, to carry their memory not as a burden, but as a banner, one we lift high when the night is long and the road is hard, one we carry not in mourning clothes, but in marching shoes. Their memory must not be boxed into moments of grief alone. It must breathe through laws rewritten, schools made safer, neighborhoods rebuilt, hearts made braver. This memory is a responsibility, a sacred inheritance. We cannot let it fade under the weight of time or the distractions of our lives. It must be kept alive in how we vote, in how we serve, in how we teach our children to love instead of hate. It must be felt in boardrooms and courtrooms, in pulpits and protests, in quiet dinners and loud rallies. It must not remain a moment frozen in sorrow, but become a movement fueled by hope. It must inspire more than tears. It must inspire transformation. Let it move mountains, not just of policy, but of perspective. Let it collapse the walls that divide and crush the stones of bigotry beneath the weight of collective will. Let it rise through generations as a testament that their sacrifice was not in vain, that their brief lives left behind a world determined to be more just, more loving, more worthy of the children it is meant to protect. Let their memory be the fire in our bones and the steel in our spine as we march, speak, serve, and rise.